The Vanishing Hour. The town of Black Hollow was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. Nestled between dense forests and a winding river, it was a quiet, unremarkable dot on the map. But on this particular morning, the town woke to a chilling discovery. Ethan Cole, a bright and popular high school senior, had vanished without trace. The news spread like wildfire. By sunrise, the town square was buzzing with whispers. Ethan had last been seen the night before, walking home from the library. His backpack was found neatly placed on a bench near the river, and beside it lay an antique pocket watch, its brass surface gleaming faintly in the early light. The watch was old, older than anything anyone in Black Hollow had seen before. Its intricate engravings seemed to shift under the sunlight, and its hands were frozen at 11:59. Detective Clara Hayes arrived at the scene just as the sun began to rise. She was a woman in her late 30s, with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her dark coat billowed in the crisp autumn wind as she knelt beside the backpack, her gloved hands carefully picking up the pocket watch. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, turning the watch over in her hands. "Why would he leave this here?" A young woman approached, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. It was Lila Bennett, Ethan's best friend. She clutched a coffee cup tightly, her hands trembling. "Detective Hayes," Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to help. Ethan wouldn't just disappear. He wouldn't." Clara studied her for a moment. Lila was in her early 20s, with a determined glint in her eyes despite her obvious distress. "Did Ethan ever mention this watch to you?" Clara asked, holding it up. Lila shook her head. "No, but I've seen it before. In stories. My grandma used to talk about a clockmaker who lived here a long time ago. Samuel Holloway. He made these watches, and people said they were cursed." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Cursed?" Before Lila could respond, a voice interrupted them. "Ah, the Holloway watch. I was wondering when it would show up again." They turned to see Victor Graves, the town's resident historian. He was a tall, wiry man in his 50s, with a shock of gray hair and a tweed jacket that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. He adjusted his glasses and peered at the watch with a mix of fascination and dread. "Victor," Clara said, her tone cautious. "What do you know about this?" Victor's eyes gleamed. Samuel Holloway was a brilliant clockmaker, but he was also a desperate man. Legend has it that he made a deal with something otherworldly. He created these watches as part of ritual. Every 50 years, someone disappears in Black Hollow. Always at midnight. Always with one of these watches left behind. Clara frowned. "You're saying this is some kind of urban legend?" Victor shrugged. "Call what you want, detective. But the facts are hard to ignore. The last disappearance was in 1973. A young woman vanished near the river, just like Ethan. And before that, in 1923, a farmer disappeared from his fields. All on the same date. All with a Holloway watch left behind." Lila's eyes widened. "That's today. The date. It's the same, isn't it?" Clara's stomach churned. She didn't believe in curses or legends, but the coincidence was hard to ignore. "We'll look into it," she said firmly. "But for now, let's focus on finding Ethan." As Clara and Lila walked away from the river, Lila hesitated. "Detective Hayes, I think there's more to this." Ethan was researching the town's history before he disappeared. He kept talking about the vanishing hour. He said it wasn't just a story. Clara stopped and turned to face her. What do you mean? Lila took a deep breath. He said there's a pattern. Every 50 years, at midnight, someone vanishes. And it's always someone connected to the town's past. Ethan's family has lived here for generations. So has mine. What if we're next? Clara's jaw tightened. She didn't want to entertain the idea, but Lila's fear was contagious. We'll figure this out, she said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. That evening, as Clara sat in her office poring over old case files, she found something that made her blood run cold. A faded newspaper clipping from 1973 described the disappearance of a young woman named Margaret Hayes. Her grandmother. Clara stared at the clipping, her hands trembling. The pocket watch on her desk began to tick, though its hands still read 11:59. The Clockmaker's secret. The morning sun filtered weakly through the grimy windows of Samuel Holloway's abandoned workshop. The air inside was thick with dust, and the scent of aged wood and rusted metal hung heavily in the room. Clara Hayes stepped inside, her boots crunching on broken glass and debris. Lila Bennett followed close behind, her eyes wide as she took in the chaotic mess of the place. The workshop was a time capsule of the past. Shelves lined the walls, filled with half-finished clocks, gears, and tools. In the center of the room stood a massive workbench, its surface cluttered with yellowed papers, blueprints, and a scattering of pocket watches identical to the one found near Ethan's backpack. This place gives me the creeps, Lila muttered, brushing cobwebs from her jacket. Clara didn't respond. Her attention was fixed on a large, ornate clock hanging on the far wall. Its hands were frozen at 11:59, just like the pocket watch. Victor Graves entered the workshop, his eyes lighting up with excitement. Ah, Samuel's sanctuary, he said, running a finger along the edge of the workbench. He spent decades here, perfecting his craft. But toward the end, his work took a darker turn. What do you mean? Clara asked, picking up one of the pocket watches. It felt unnaturally cold in her hand. Victor adjusted his glasses and began to explain. Samuel was a brilliant man, but he was also desperate. His daughter, Eliza, fell ill with a mysterious disease. No doctor could cure her. Desperate to save her, Samuel turned to unconventional methods. Lila frowned. Unconventional how? Victor hesitated, then said, he made a deal with something not of this world. In exchange for Eliza's life, he agreed to create these watches. Each one is a key, you see, a key to a door that should never be opened. Clara's eyes narrowed. A door to what? Victor's voice dropped to a whisper. To the other side. A place where time doesn't flow the way it does here. But every 50 years, the door cracks open and someone is taken. A life for a life. Lila shivered. You're saying Ethan was sacrificed? Not sacrificed, Victor corrected. Chosen. By whatever Samuel made that deal with. Clara set the pocket watch down, her mind racing. If this is true, then we need to find out how to stop it. Where's Samuel now? Victor gestured to a door at the back of the workshop. His personal study is through there. But be warned, Samuel didn't leave this world peacefully. His presence may still linger. Lila hesitated. You're saying this place is haunted? Victor gave her a grim smile. Let's just say Samuel's work wasn't the only thing that took a darker turn. The trio moved to the study, a small room filled with bookshelves and a desk piled high with journals. Clara picked up one of the journals and flipped through its pages. The handwriting was frantic, almost illegible, but one phrase stood out. "The vanishing hour is upon us." Lila found a blueprint spread out on the desk. It depicted a complex mechanism with gears and symbols she didn't recognize. "What is this?" she asked, holding it up. Victor's eyes widened. "That's the design for the main clock, the one that controls the portal. If we can find it, we might be able to stop the cycle." As they searched the study, a sudden noise made them freeze. It was the sound of a clock ticking, loud and clear, though none of the clocks in the workshop were working. Clara turned to see the pocket watch she had set down earlier, now lying on the floor, its lid open. The hands were moving, ticking backward. "What the—" Lila started, but her words were cut off by a low, guttural growl coming from the shadows. Victor's face paled. "We're not alone." The first turn, the ticking of the pocket watch grew louder, echoing through the workshop like a heartbeat. Clara, Lila, and Victor stood frozen, their eyes locked on the watch lying on the floor. Its hands spun wildly, first forward, then backward, as if time itself were unraveling. The growl from the shadows deepened, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Clara's breath came out in visible puffs, and she instinctively reached for the flashlight on her belt. The beam cut through the dim light, illuminating the corner of the room where the sound had come from. There was nothing there. "We need to leave," Victor said, his voice trembling. "Now." But before they could move, the door to the study slammed shut with a deafening crash. Lila let out a startled cry, and Clara spun around, her flashlight darting to the door. The shadows around it seemed to writhe and twist, as if alive. "What's happening?" Lila demanded, her voice rising in panic. "Samuel's presence," Victor said, his face pale. "He's angry, or maybe it's whatever he made the deal with. Either way, we're not welcome here." Clara clenched her jaw. "We're not leaving without answers. If Samuel's here, then he's going to tell us how to stop this." She stepped toward the study door, but Lila grabbed her arm. "Are you crazy? Did you not just see that?" "I saw it," Clara said firmly. "But if we don't figure this out, more people are going to disappear. Maybe even us." Victor hesitated, then nodded. "She's right. We need to face this, but we need to be careful." Samuel's journals mentioned a ritual, a way to communicate with him. If we can find it, we might be able to get the answers we need. The trio moved back to the study, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The air grew heavier with each step, and the shadows seemed to close in around them. Clara's flashlight flickered, and she smacked it against her palm to keep it steady. On the desk, Samuel's journals lay open, their pages filled with frantic scribbles and diagrams. Victor picked up one of them, his hands shaking as he flipped through the pages. "Here," he said, pointing to a passage. "It's a ritual." He called it the first turn. "It's meant to open a line of communication with whatever's on the other side." Lila leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the page. "It says we need a pocket watch, a drop of blood, and a name." "Whose name?" Victor hesitated. "The name of the person who wants to speak to him. But it's dangerous. If we do this wrong, we can make things worse." Clara stepped forward. "We don't have a choice." "I'll do it." They cleared a space on the floor, using chalk to draw a circle and strange symbols based on the journal's instructions. Clara placed the pocket watch in the center, its hands still spinning erratically. She pricked her finger with a pin from the workbench and let a single drop of blood fall onto the watch. Samuel Holloway, she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. We need to talk. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the room seemed to shift, the walls bending and warping as if reality itself were folding. The pocket watch glowed with an eerie light, and a voice, deep and resonant, filled the room. You should not have come here. The shadows coalesced into a figure, a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes and a face that seemed both young and ancient. Samuel Holloway. His presence filled the room with a suffocating weight, and his voice was like the grinding of gears. You think you can stop what I set in motion? He said, his gaze piercing. You are fools. The vanishing hour cannot be undone. Clara stepped forward, her fists clenched. We're not asking for your permission. We're stopping this. Tell us how. Samuel's lips curled into a grim smile. Very well. But know this, the price for knowledge is steep. One of you must take the place of the next soul to be taken. Are you prepared to pay it? Before anyone could respond, the room shook violently, and the pocket watch exploded in a burst of light. When the dust settled, Lila was gone. Clara and Victor stared at the empty space where Lila had been standing, their hearts pounding. The pocket watch lay shattered on the floor, its hands frozen at 12 o'clock. We're running out of time, Clara whispered. The shadowed path. The workshop was silent, save for the faint ticking of the shattered pocket watch. Clara stared at the empty space where Lila had been standing, her mind racing. Victor stood frozen, his face pale and his hands clutching Samuel's journal so tightly his knuckles turned white. She's gone, Clara whispered, her voice breaking. She's gone, and it's my fault. Victor shook his head, though his expression was grim. No, it's Samuel's fault, or whatever he made that deal with. We need to focus. If we can find the main clock, the one that controls the portal, we might still be able to save her. Clara took a deep breath, forcing herself to think. The journal mentioned a tunnel, a path to the other side. If we can find it, maybe we can bring her back. Victor hesitated. Clara, that's incredibly dangerous. We don't even know what's on the other side. We don't have a choice, Clara said firmly. Lila's there, and if we don't act fast, she'll be lost forever. They left the workshop and made their way to the edge of town, where the forest loomed like a dark wall. The journal had mentioned a hidden entrance near an old oak tree, its roots twisted into the shape of a door. It didn't take long to find it. The tree was impossible to miss, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. At its base was a narrow opening, barely wide enough for a person squeezed through. Clara shone her flashlight into the tunnel, revealing a steep, rocky descent. The air that wafted up was cold and damp, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and something metallic. This is it, Victor said, his voice barely above a whisper. The shadowed path. Clara nodded, her jaw set. Let's go. The tunnel was narrow and claustrophobic, the walls pressing in on all sides. The flashlight's beam barely pierced the darkness, revealing jagged rocks and roots that seemed to reach out like grasping hands. The deeper they went, the colder it became, until their breath came out in visible puffs. Do you hear that? Victor asked suddenly, his voice tense. Clara stopped, listening. At first there was nothing. Then, faintly she heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat. It seemed to come from all around them, growing louder with each step. What is that? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Victor replied, but I don't like it. As they pressed on, the tunnel began to change. The walls grew smoother, almost polished, and the air took on a strange, electric charge. The thumping grew louder, reverberating through the ground beneath their feet. "This isn't natural," Victor said, his voice trembling. "This place, it's alive." Clara didn't respond. Her attention was fixed on something ahead, a faint, pulsating light. As they drew closer, the tunnel opened up into a vast cavern. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols they'd seen in Samuel's workshop, glowing faintly in the dark. In the center of the cavern stood a massive clock, its gears turning slowly and deliberately. The hands were frozen at 11:59, just like the pocket watch. "The main clock," Clara said, her voice filled with awe. Before they could approach the clock, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Lila, but she was different. Her eyes were hollow, and her movements were jerky and unnatural. "Lila," Clara called, her voice trembling. Lila didn't respond. Instead, she raised a hand, pointing to the clock. "It's too late," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "The vanishing hour is here." Behind her, more figures began to emerge from the shadows, ghostly, twisted versions of the people who had disappeared over the years. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were synchronized, as if controlled by some unseen force. Clara and Victor backed away, their hearts pounding. The clock's ticking grew louder, filling the cavern with a deafening rhythm. "We need to destroy it," Clara said, her voice barely audible over the noise. "And how do you propose we do that?" Victor asked, his voice filled with panic. Before Clara could respond, the clock's hands began to move. The fractured hour. The cavern was alive with the deafening ticking of the massive clock. Its hands, frozen for so long, now began to move, slowly at first, then faster, as if racing against some unseen deadline. Clara and Victor stood frozen, their eyes locked on the clock as the ghostly figures of the vanished closed in around them. Lila's hollow eyes bore into Clara's, her voice echoing unnaturally. "It's too late. The vanishing hour is here." Clara's mind raced. She glanced at Victor, who was clutching Samuel's journal like a lifeline. "We need to stop that clock," she said, her voice barely audible over the noise. "And how do you propose we do that?" Victor shouted back, his voice tinged with panic. Before Clara could respond, the ground beneath them shook violently. The symbols on the walls flared brighter, casting eerie shadows that danced and twisted like living things. Clara took a step toward the clock, but one of the shadowy figures moved to block her path. It was a man, his face gaunt and his eyes glowing faintly. He reached out a hand, and Clara felt a cold, numbing sensation wash over her. "You don't belong here," the figure said, its voice a hollow whisper. Clara stumbled back, her heart pounding. "Victor, we need to do something." Victor flipped through the journal frantically, his hands shaking. "There's something here, a way to disrupt the clock. But it requires a sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Clara demanded. Victor hesitated, then said, "Time. We have to give it time. But not just any time, our time. Minutes, hours, maybe even years of our lives." Clara's stomach churned. "You're saying we have to age ourselves?" Victor nodded grimly. "It's the only way to stop the clock. But once we do it, there's no going back." Clara looked at the clock, its hands now spinning wildly. The ghostly figures were closing in, their hollow eyes fixed on her and Victor. She thought of Lila, of Ethan, of all the people who had been taken. She thought of her grandmother, who had vanished 50 years ago. "Do it," she said, her voice firm. Victor's eyes widened. "Clara, are you sure? This could—" "Do it," she shouted, cutting him off. Victor nodded, his hands trembling as he flipped to a page in the journal. He began to chant in a low, steady voice, the words foreign and ancient. The symbols on the walls flared brighter, and the air grew heavy with energy. Clara felt a strange pull, as if something inside her was being drawn out. She looked down at her hands and gasped. They were aging before her eyes, her skin growing wrinkled and thin. The clock's hands began to slow, their movement becoming jerky and uneven. The ghostly figures wavered, their forms flickering like candle flames in the wind. Lila's hollow eyes met Clara's, and for a moment there was a flicker of recognition. "Clara," Lila whispered, her voice barely audible. Clara reached out, her aged hand trembling. "I'm here, Lila. I'm not leaving you." But before she could touch her, the ground shook again, and the clock's hands stopped completely. The cavern was plunged into silence, the ghostly figures frozen in place. Clara and Victor stood in the stillness, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The clock's hands were frozen at 12 o'clock, and the symbols on the walls had dimmed to a faint glow. But the silence didn't last. Slowly, the clock began to tick again, this time backward. The Pact Revealed. The cavern was eerily silent, save for the faint, irregular ticking of the massive clock. Its hands, frozen at 12 o'clock, now began to move backward, each tick echoing like a hammer strike. Clara stared at the clock, her aged hands trembling as she tried to process what was happening. "Victor," she said, her voice hoarse. "What's going on? Why is it moving backward?" Victor flipped through Samuel's journal frantically, his face pale. I don't know. The ritual was supposed to stop it, not reverse it." The ghostly figures around them began to stir, their hollow eyes flickering with a strange, malevolent light. Lila's form wavered, her voice echoing faintly. "You don't understand. The clock isn't just a machine. It's a gateway, and you just unlocked it." Clara's heart sank. "What do you mean, unlocked it?" Before Lila could respond, the ground beneath them shook violently. The symbols on the walls flared brighter, and the air grew heavy with a suffocating energy. Victor's eyes widened as he scanned the journal. "There's something here, a passage I didn't see before. It talks about a pact, a deal Samuel made to save his daughter. But it wasn't just a one-time deal. It's a cycle. Every 50 years, the gateway opens, and someone has to take the place of the souls trapped on the other side." Clara's stomach churned. "You're saying someone has to stay behind?" Victor nodded grimly. "Yes, and if no one does, the gateway will remain open, and the vanishing hour will continue. Forever." Clara looked at Lila, her heart breaking. "Is that what happened to you? You were chosen." Lila's form flickered, her voice barely audible. "Not chosen. Sacrificed. Samuel's pact requires a life for a life. But it's not just about saving one person. It's about balancing the scales." Clara's mind raced. She thought of her grandmother, of Ethan, of all the people who had been taken over the years. She thought of Lila, trapped in this nightmare because of her. "There has to be another way," Clara said, her voice desperate. We can't just leave her here. Victor hesitated, then said, there might be. The journal mentions a way to break the pact, but it's dangerous. It requires confronting Samuel directly on the other side. Clara's eyes narrowed. Then that's what we'll do. Victor shook his head. Clara, you don't understand. If we cross over, there's no guarantee we'll come back. And even if we do, the cost could be unimaginable. Clara stepped forward, her aged hands clenched into fists. I don't care. I'm not leaving her here. Not again. Lila's form flickered, her voice filled with sorrow. Clara, don't. It's not worth it. You are worth it, Clara said firmly. All of you are. Victor took a deep breath, then nodded. All right, but we need to hurry. The gateway won't stay open forever. He began to chant again, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. The symbols on the walls flared brighter, and the air grew thick with energy. Clara felt a strange pull, as if something inside her was being drawn out. The clock's hands began to spin faster, their movement becoming a blur. The ghostly figures around them wavered, their forms flickering like candle flames in the wind. And then, with a deafening crack, the gateway opened. Clara and Victor stepped through the gateway, their hearts pounding. On the other side, they found themselves in a twisted, inverted version of Black Hollow. The sky was a deep, unnatural red, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. Standing in the center of the town square was Samuel Holloway, his hollow eyes glowing faintly. You shouldn't have come here, he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. The final countdown. The inverted version of Black Hollow was a nightmare come to life. The sky burned a deep, unnatural red, casting an eerie glow over the twisted buildings and cracked streets. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath Clara's feet felt unstable, as if it might give way at any moment. Samuel Holloway stood in the center of the town square, his hollow eyes glowing faintly. His presence was suffocating, a weight that pressed down on Clara and Victor as they approached. You shouldn't have come here, Samuel said, his voice echoing unnaturally. This place is not for the living. Clara stepped forward, her aged hands clenched into fists. We're not leaving without Lila, and we're not letting you take anyone else. Samuel's lips curled into a grim smile. You think you can stop me? You think you can break the pact? We're going to try, Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Victor stepped forward, holding Samuel's journal like a shield. We know about the pact. We know what you did to save your daughter. But this has to end. You've taken enough lives. Samuel's expression darkened. You don't understand. The pact is eternal. It cannot be broken. There's always a way, Clara said, her eyes narrowing. And we're going to find it. Samuel raised a hand, and the ground beneath them shook violently. The twisted buildings around them began to collapse, their walls crumbling into dust. The air grew heavier, and the red sky seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Clara and Victor stumbled back, their hearts pounding. Lila's ghostly form appeared beside them, her hollow eyes filled with sorrow. You have to destroy the clock, Lila said, her voice barely audible. It's the only way to break the pact. Ow! Clara demanded. We're not even in the same world anymore. Lila pointed to the center of the square, where a faint, pulsating light was visible. The clock is here too. It exists in both worlds. If you destroy it here, it will break the cycle. Victor nodded, his face pale but determined. We need to hurry. This place is falling apart. The trio ran toward the light, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The ground beneath them cracked and shifted, and the air grew hotter with each step. The clock loomed ahead, its hands spinning wildly, the gears grinding with a deafening noise. As they reached the clock, Samuel appeared before them, his form towering and menacing. You cannot stop what has already begun, he said, his voice filled with rage. Clara stepped forward, her aged hands trembling. "Watch me." Victor began to chant from the journal, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. The symbols on the clock flared brighter, and the air grew thick with energy. Clara felt a strange pull, as if something inside her was being drawn out. Samuel lunged at them, but Lila stepped in front, her ghostly form flickering with a faint light. "This ends now," she said, her voice filled with determination. With a final, deafening crack, the clock exploded in a burst of light. The ground beneath them shook violently, and the air grew thick with dust and debris. When the dust settled, Clara and Victor found themselves back in the cavern. The massive clock shattered and silent. The ghostly figures were gone, and the air was still. But Lila was nowhere to be seen. The echoes of Black Hollow. The town square of Black Hollow at night. The clock tower stands tall and intact, its hands frozen at 12 o'clock. The streets are empty, and the only sound is the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. The air is thick with a sense of finality and quiet reflection. Clara Hayes in the foreground, standing in the town square and staring up at the clock tower. Her face is a mix of sorrow and determination. The clock tower in the background, its hands frozen at 12 o'clock. The tower is intact, its surface gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The pocket watch in Clara's hand, its brass surface gleaming faintly. The hands are frozen at 11:59. The empty streets surrounding the square, their surfaces smooth and undisturbed. A cold, eerie glow emanating from the clock tower and the pocket watch. The air is thick with a faint electric charge, visible as subtle sparks in the darkness. The ground is uneven and rocky, with faint traces of glowing liquid pooling in places. The shadows seem alive, twisting and writhing unnaturally. Arc, moody tones with highlights of blue and gold from the glowing symbols and clock. Highly detailed textures, from the rough cavern walls to the intricate gears of the clock. A sense of motion and tension, with the shadows and light swirling dynamically. Tension, dread, and a sense of inevitability. The image should convey the moment when the characters realize the true cost of their actions, as the clock begins to move and the shadows close in. The echoes of Black Hollow. Conclusion. Clara stood frozen in the town square, the pocket watch clutched tightly in her hand. The voice she had heard, soft, familiar, and filled with gratitude, lingered in her mind like a distant echo. She looked around, half expecting to see Lila standing there, but the square was empty. The clock tower loomed above her, its hands still frozen at 12 o'clock. The air was cold, and the faint ticking of the pocket watch seemed to grow louder, filling the silence. "Lila," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. There was no response. Clara opened the pocket watch, her hand shaking. Inside, the gears were still, but the face of the watch had changed. Instead of numbers, there were symbols, the same ones they had seen in Samuel's workshop and the cavern. They glowed faintly, pulsing with a soft, otherworldly light. As she stared at the watch, memories flooded her mind. Memories of Lila, of Ethan, of her grandmother, and of all the others who had been taken. She saw their faces, heard their voices, and felt their presence as if they were standing beside her. And then she understood. The pocket watch wasn't just a key to the vanishing hour. It was a bridge, a connection to the other side. And though the pact was broken, the echoes of those who had been lost still lingered, their stories etched into the fabric of time itself. Clara closed the watch, her heart heavy but at peace. She knew she couldn't bring them back, but she could honor their memory. She could make sure their stories were never forgotten. She placed the pocket watch on the steps of the clock tower, its brass surface gleaming in the moonlight. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet resolve. for everything. As she turned to leave, the clock tower began to chime. The sound was deep and resonant, echoing through the empty streets of Black Hollow. Clara looked back and saw the hands of the clock moving for the first time in decades, ticking forward once more. One evening, as Clara stood in the town square, she noticed something on the ground, a small, familiar object. It was the pocket watch, its brass surface gleaming faintly in the moonlight. She picked it up, her hands trembling. The watch was cold to the touch, and its hands were frozen at 11:59. And then, faintly, she heard it, a voice, soft and familiar. "Thank you," it whispered. The town of Black Hollow began to heal. The clock tower, once a symbol of fear and loss, became a beacon of hope. Clara and Victor worked together to document the town's history, ensuring that the stories of those who had been taken would never be forgotten. Years passed, and life in Black Hollow returned to normal, or as normal as it could be. Clara often visited the clock tower, her heart filled with a quiet sense of peace. She knew the echoes of the past would always be a part of her, but she also knew that the future was hers to shape. If you enjoyed this story of mystery, sacrifice, and the echoes of the past, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling tale. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Clara's journey and what mysteries you'd like to see explored next. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay curious.